Hello everyone and welcome to this analysis of Child of Eden. Child of Eden is a quite unique on-rail shooter created by Japanese game personality Tetsuya Mitsuguchi, ex-Sega designer now at the helm of Q Entertainment. While he was at Sega, Mitsuguchi developed games such as Sega Rally Championship, Space Channel 5 and Res. Spiritual prequel to the latter, Child of Eden was originally released on the Xbox 360 last June with Kinect support, and it's now available on the PS3 with Move and exclusive stereoscopic 3D support both at retail and on PlayStation Store. Throughout this analysis I will focus on Move controls and compare them to the Kinect ones. I will also investigate visual differences between the Xbox 360 and the PS3 versions. Before getting there though, let me offer a quick overview of the game. Much like Res, Child of Eden throws you into a cyberspace with the task of purifying its ecosystem from a virus. In practice, you shoot at anything that moves, and you do so using two weapons, a lock-on laser and a tracer. With the former, you can lock onto a maximum of 8 targets at once. Releasing a shot when 8 targets are locked on awards you a score bonus, and doing so to the beat of the music increases your score multiplier by 1 to a maximum of 8 times. As for the tracer, that works like a machine gun and is effective against purple targets including enemy bullets, which are immune to the laser. Some enemies need to be softened with the tracer before being able to lock onto them with the laser. Finally, purified enemies will sometimes drop items which you need to shoot to collect. The blue ones are for life recovery, while the pink ones are basically smart bombs. Another unique element of Child of Eden is the way the camera works. Despite its on-rail progression, the game allows to freely pitch and yaw the camera by about 180 degrees, effectively extending the playing field beyond the screen boundaries. While enemies do generally appear in front of you, camera tilting is required to keep them into view as they move around, as well as to shoot at bullets coming from outside your field of view, their presence and position indicated by arrows around a purple circle. Okay, now that you know the basics, let's take a look at the move implementation, starting from the calibration process. As usual, the first step is to point the move at the camera and hit the main move button. Done that, you are asked to hold the controller as indicated by an on-screen drawing. This second step allows to define the so-called control range, which is basically a box representing the edge of the screen. Notice how the position of the cursor relative to the edge of the screen mirrors that of the move sphere relative to the box margins. I will explain in more detail what this entails in a few seconds, but before getting there it's worth discussing a bit how the aiming system works. As you can see here, the on-screen cursor doesn't react to move tilting, but rather to its sphere position. What this means in practice is that aiming in Child of Eden works differently from other move shooters, as it pretty much mimics the aiming system designed for the Kinect version. The only difference being that whereas the Kinect solution tracks your hand position directly, the move version does that indirectly through sphere position tracking. This is not to say the move sensors are asleep though. As you can see here, they are pretty much awake and serve two purposes. One of approximating sphere position whenever the sphere gets obscured, and more importantly, one of reducing the input lag. Because the sensors are faster in detecting motions than image processing, by working together with the sphere position tracking, they push the move version of Child of Eden ahead of the Kinect one in terms of responsiveness. Notice here how the Kinect cursor lags a few frames behind the Move one in this totally unscientific but nonetheless fairly representative comparison. the superior responsiveness of the Move cursor might also be the reason behind its smaller size compared to the Kinect one. As you can see here in this side-by-side comparison, the Kinect cursor is slightly bigger than the Move one, which then again is slightly bigger than the controller one. Okay, now before moving on with the controls analysis, I need to go back to the Move calibration process for a few words of advice. First of all, when asked to point at the camera, do not extend your arm like this. You see, the position the sphere is at when you push the Move button here becomes the center of your playing canvas, so to speak, which might very well not match the position of your hand when you intend to aim at the center of the screen. In fact, as I go back to my normal playing stance, the cursor follows, forcing me to raise the arm again in order to aim at the center of the screen. So what you want to do is to be sure the sphere is at the center of your intended playing canvas before pushing the Move button here. As you have probably guessed already, the step asking to adjust the control range is also the one defining the cursor sensitivity. The farther you push the Move to the side here, the more you will need to wave your arm around to move the cursor across the screen, so be sure to keep it pretty close to you. Another thing to keep in mind is that there is a strong discrepancy in motion scaling between the menus and the actual game. Going by the way the cursor travels around the screen here, you might rightfully believe you are all set to play the game with little waggling, but that's not really the case. Notice here how the cursor touches the edge of the screen as the Move sphere touches those two lines in the picture-in-picture. Now see how differently things work when I unpause the game. Notice how the Move sphere has to travel past those margins in the picture-in-picture for the cursor to reach the edge of the screen. Here is another way to highlight this motion scaling inconsistency. The yellow box is my intended control range, which perfectly overlaps the whole pause screen here tinted in red. As soon as I get back to the game though, the very same degree of waggling results in a much smaller screen coverage by the actual reticle, so definitely keep this in mind when calibrating. When it comes to the Kinect version, an identical issue is present as well. In this case, there is no calibration process per se, as the Kinect camera deals with it automatically, so you have a dedicated option screen for adjusting the cursor sensitivity, or rather its speed. There is also a unique cursor smoothing option, which helps in reducing some of the cursor jitter. The Move version lacks this option since sphere tracking is pretty robust already. Anyway, back to the motion scaling argument, as I said, the same inconsistency we have seen with the Move version applies to the Kinect one as well. Here I have set the cursor speed too fast. And here is the same test with the cursor speed set too slow. An option I'm not sure why it's even there, considering the shoulder dislocating degree of arm stretching it entails. Another oddity both the Kinect and the Move version of Child of Eden share is the cursor's self-recentering behavior. Notice here how the cursor gravitates towards the center of the screen as soon as I stop moving. And here is the same thing occurring with the Kinect version. The reason why I call this feature an oddity comes from the fact that I can't really see how the game benefits from it in the first place. Perhaps it's intended to speed up camera direction switches, but then again it doesn't do any good to the reticle control whenever finer aim adjustments are needed. See here how the cursor doesn't follow my hand as it travels at a speed matching that of the gravity pull. You hardly notice this while playing, as you usually move the reticle very fast most of the time, but still I don't see how this self-recentering system improves the quality of the experience. It surely does when using a traditional controller though, as it helps recentering the cursor without too much stick work. Since we are on the subject of controls, let's check them out in more detail. As you have guessed already, camera control works pretty much as you would imagine, that is, pushing the cursor away from a small dead zone in the middle of the screen. Much like a first-person shooter basically, but with no option to adjust the dead zone and limited by a camera turning area that doesn't get past about 180 degrees of pitch and yaw freedom. While both the Move and the Kinect version behave the same in this regard, an interesting difference can be found when using a traditional controller. On both platforms, in fact, when using their respective controllers, the camera turning range is severely limited. As you can see here, with either Move or Kinect, you can almost look straight at your sides. And as you can see here, this is not the case with a traditional controller. It's difficult to say why the range of camera rotation is wider with the motion interfaces. Perhaps it's meant to enhance the immersion, but considering a wider rotation range effectively widens the time window for picking up enemies traveling past you, maybe this is some sort of compensation for the time wasted in reacquiring targets after all the waggling the motion shooting system entails. So let's take a look at how the shooting system works in practice. Each version of the game provides two control schemes. Let's compare the default ones first. The basic lock and fire mechanic is pretty straightforward. The lock-on laser locks automatically when the reticle passes over a target, and to release the shot you simply flick your hand forward. The Kinect version works exactly the same, minus the move in your hand. Both versions register any sort of forward flick, including a Jedi-like forward push, but there is a small difference in consistency worth pointing out. As you can see in the picture-in-picture here, of all the flicks you can do with the move, the one that has your wrist bending outwards and then inwards is not as easily detected. The reason why this happens comes down to the different degree at which you can bend the wrist in various directions. The thing is, you can't bend the wrist outwards to the same degree you can do so inwards. When flicking from left to right, then, the sphere travels a much longer distance compared to when flicking from right to left, and since the PlayStation Eye can register changes in sphere diameter by 1 cm, it's very easy for that right to left flick to go undetected. When it comes to Kinect, this limitation doesn't affect tracking consistency, simply because you naturally tend to bend the elbow as well, increasing the distance the hand travels along the Z-axis. Moving on to the tracer, firing it with the move is just a matter of holding down the move trigger. The good thing about having a button assigned to the tracer is that switching to it doesn't disrupt your aiming at all, which is not the case with Kinect. Here in fact, the default control scheme requires to lower your right hand and raise your left one to start firing with the tracer, which is a fast process, but still one calling for a time-consuming target reacquisition. Not to mention a slight but yet unintended camera movement. An even more severe aiming disruption comes from triggering the smart bomb, which is a simple button press away with the move version, the main move button, whereas with Kinect you need to raise both arms. Not a big deal though, since the smart bomb clears the screen from targets anyway. As for the second control scheme, the move one removes all the waggling from the laser firing mechanic. The tracer works just like with the default one, but targets are locked on as long as you hold down the main move button. Releasing it fires the shots. The smart bomb can be unleashed with any of the 4 face buttons. Contrary to the move alternative, the second Kinect control scheme intensifies the waggling. Both hands control the reticle without switching firing mode. To do so you need to clap your hands instead. You don't need to actually clap though, as bringing the hands close to each other is enough to trigger the switch. While I said both versions provide 2 different control types, the Move 1 actually offers a third, unofficial alternative so to speak, which is the most effective of all in my opinion. When adopting the default control scheme, flicking the wrist is not the only way to unleash the lasers. Once you have your targets locked, in fact, simply tapping the trigger to fire the tracer automatically fires the laser shots as well. Switching to the tracer fires the laser shots in the Kinect version as well, but you still need to raise an arm. With Move you benefit from the fact that you simply tap the trigger, and this is faster than even the official buttons-only control scheme. As I have explained, that one requires to hold down the Move button to lock on and then release it to fire. Here lock on is automatic and fire a simple tap away. You basically use only one button instead of 2 and do no waggling either. The best part is that you can still do your flicks if you so desire, and simply use the trigger trick when action demands quicker reactions. Actually, you can even fire tracer and laser simultaneously by quickly tapping the trigger, provided you are not going after score records, as this sort of simultaneous fire mode prevents you from locking more than one target at once, not to mention disposing of them to the beat of the music. Quite an useful trick though, especially for at least getting to the end of the quite challenging bonus level named Hope you are watching here. So while the Move version of Child of Eden benefits from a button's usage during actual gameplay, the same can be said about menu interaction. Just like with the Kinect version, in fact, items selection requires to hold the cursor over them for a few seconds. An option to speed up the selection by actually pressing a button would have been welcome. Also, camera manipulation in the garden is exclusive to the controller interface, but you can at least attract creatures pasturing within it by holding down the Move button. Creatures and other garden decorations are progressively unlocked as you play the game, by the way. With Kinect instead, you need to clap your hands to make the cursor attractive. Speaking of buttons, with Move you can of course pause the game pressing start. whereas the Kinect version has you striking this pose and weight, potentially jeopardizing your performance. But this is not the biggest inconvenience of being the controller. What's more like it are the constraints you must endure for the privilege. First of all, there is the need to keep your hand at some distance from your torso. In fact, as you can see here, whenever I bring the hand towards my chest, the cursor starts freaking out, as the Kinect camera attempts to sort my hand from the rest of my body. Things get worse when you try to play seated. If your seat comes with the armrests, the Kinect camera appears to have an hard time realizing you haven't grown an extra pair of arms, even if you hold your hand like you see in the picture-in-picture, or get closer to the camera. Tracking gets better if your chair is without armrests, but this is true as long as you keep your hand away from your legs, as they seem to interfere with the detection. Move interaction doesn't suffer from any of these issues, of course, as the sphere is tracked perfectly wherever it is relative to your body, which then again means you can play Child of Eden however you like. But this is true as long as you make sure you are around the center of the PSI field of view. In this example here, I'm going through the calibration process while seated, the camera still pointed straight ahead. Pay close attention to the position and behavior of the on-screen cursor as I bring the move sphere near the bottom of the control range box. Notice how the distance of the on-screen cursor from the bottom edge of the screen doesn't match that of the move sphere relative to the bottom edge of the box. Not only that, as the sphere approaches the bottom edge of the camera field of view, the cursor starts jumping. Initially I thought this was due to the spotlight burning my retinas during the recording, hampering sphere visibility, but the same issue occurs when the spotlight is turned off. So I rather suspect this issue is related to the slight fisheye distortion at the periphery of the PSI lens. It's likely that the slight sphere deformation occurring as it enters the distorted area makes it harder for the system to keep track of its center. As a matter of fact, the problem disappears if I tilt the camera downwards to better frame myself. So be sure you adjust the PSI orientation accordingly. Contrary to other move shooters whose reticles are projected mainly by a tilting detection, the position-based nature of a cursor operation in Child of Eden implies the need to recalibrate whenever you change position. Notice here how the cursor follows my body movements despite my hand being perfectly still relative to my body. The Kinect version instead knows where your hand is relative to your body, so when you move around it automatically recalibrates. Notice here how the cursor recenters upon sidestepping. Basically, when moving around, you drag the playing canvas with you. The Move version can't do this due to the lack of a reference point. What it can do though is provide some extra feedback to the player, that of vibrations. Albeit lightly, the controller vibrates in various situations and to various degrees, providing not only a nice tactile feedback but also a supplementary cue for when to fire your laser shots, as it constantly vibrates to the main beat of the music. The trance option you are seeing here adds more vibrations to the experience by enabling vibration on all connected controllers. The Kinect version offers a similar option, allowing to turn on the vibration on up to 4 controllers. It goes without saying that to actually enjoy the extra vibrations on either platforms, you have to find a place for the controllers on your body. A dedicated vibro belt was apparently released in Japan for the 360 version, by the way. Anyway, pay close attention to the picture-in-picture here to get an idea of how this extra rumbling option adds to the sensory experience. Moving away from the controls and into the visuals, I'm happy to report that the PS3 version of Child of Eden runs at the same resolution and frame rate of the 360 counterpart, that is 720p and 60 frames per second. That said, some minor differences in textures, geometry and visual effects are in place and worth pointing out. Some of them are negligible, while others seem to suggest a more serious reworking of the graphical content, like the slightly different cog models down there. Notice for example the different texture work on those pillars, or rather how differently similar textures have been applied. The 360 version displays an higher resolution texture in the middle part of the pillars, while the PS3 one seems to have a similar texture expanded to cover the wall pillars. In this other sequence you can notice a different cog model to the left. The PS1 looks more complex, while farther ahead the 360 version displays 4 cogs instead of 2. While this upcoming portal seems to suggest a more pronounced light glow effect in the PS3 version, this is actually a curious exception to a state of affairs that has the 360 version beating the PS3 one in terms of light effects. For instance, take a look at this other comparison and notice that sort of a dazzling light effect on the buildings in the 360 version. That effect is completely missing in the PS3 code, and that's not the only one. Look at this side-by-side footage and notice how the 360 version displays a stronger flare effect on those purple bullets, a richer sparkling and overall more glow. Ironically, the energy bar on top of the screen are the only visual elements glowing more in the PS3 version compared to the 360 one. So at the end of the day, while both versions run identically and look pretty similar, the PS3 one is clearly less shiny and vibrant, as this next comparison further testifies. On top of its superior vibrancy, the 360 version employs a nice effect underlying each laser shot with an array of blue sparks sprayed into the game world according to the direction of your flicks. This effect is completely missing in the PS3 version. Despite these visual shortcomings though, the PS3 edition of Child of Eden does still look pretty spectacular, probably even more so if you have the means to take advantage of its exclusive stereoscopic 3D mode, which I'm told does wonders to the immersion. And with that, I guess I'm done with this analysis. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did playing this fascinating shooter twice. See you next time then. Thanks for watching, ciao!